Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this idea that functional strength is largely a myth. It's largely nonsense in the way that it's presented, meaning there's almost no such thing as non-functional strength. And I'm not saying you're going to be at your strongest, obviously, if you do nothing but isolation movements. But realistically speaking, if you sat around on machines and isolated every muscle, you would gain some functional strength, okay? Versus if you did nothing. So we need to be very, very clear. Even isolation work improves functional strength. So if you were to come in and again, I would never advocate anyone do this. You were to take someone who hasn't gained muscle, hasn't lifted, and come in and do leg extensions and leg curls and a glute machine and a hip machine and then a pec deck and a tricep machine and a lat pull down and all this stuff, right? Let's say you had them do nothing but try to isolate muscles, but they isolated pretty much every muscle in the body on machines and did it for 6 months straight and got stronger and stronger at those machines. Would they have functional strength that carried over? Of course they would, because all their muscles got built. All right, so we need to be very clear. All muscle mass, as it gets bigger, produces more force production, and you're going to get stronger to some extent. People say, well, does that carry over to the real world? Well, how does bouncing around on a Bosu ball carry over to the real world? I mean, so I want people to think about that from a specificity of training, right? You guys familiar with that set? It's called specific adaptation to imposed demands. It is one of the core principles of exercise science, right? In other words, to get good at something or to have a skill that carries over, it needs to be something very close to what you're trying to achieve. Okay, that will usually have, to some extent, a greater carryover. Not absolutely a truth, but generally speaking, right? In other words, if you want to get better at the skill of maxing on a bench press, you may want to think about maxing on the bench press a little more often, just throwing it out there. But will any building up of your chest and triceps and delts probably help? Yeah, of course. In fact, muscle mass is the basis of your strength. So we need to understand that first and that second part. Yes, there's going to be specificity that carries over to whatever skill you're trying to do in the real world race. You're trying to pick up your grocery bags, trying to pick up your kids, you're trying to reach up and get something high off a shelf. Okay, that's functional strength. What do they mean to a sport? Okay, all right. So yeah, you're looking at specificity, but you also have to keep in mind all that neural drive and skill component is still based off of how much force your muscles are capable of producing. All right, the force production potential of a muscle comes from cross-sectional area of the muscle fibers, which means from making them grow. Right? Not saying all aspects of muscle growth, all the individual cellular components always carry over to more strength, but the contractile protein part does, the myofibrillar growth, all of that has a direct one-to-one correlation with force production. If you double the cross-sectional area of the muscle fibers in a muscle, that muscle strength will literally double. It will carry over almost directly. Study after study has proven this for 20 plus years. It's like this is not really questioned anymore. So again, yes, skill stuff matters, but you need to actually build muscle to produce more force, right? To have any strength. Like that's where your strength ceiling comes from, the amount of muscle you gain. So, that being said, it would make sense that, yeah, you're going to want a lot of your training to be geared towards maximizing muscle growth. And people say, well, what about the stability and all the coordination? Well, yeah, we can do exercises to do that. But if we're going to talk about specificity of training, what exactly are you training for if you're squatting on a Bosu ball or an unstable platform? Let's say you have someone clean up a pair of light dumbbells up and you have them squat on one of those little wobbly balls, right? Like the little one-sided Bosu ball. How does this real world strength? How is this functional strength? What does this carry over to? Well, what if I need to drop into a squat on a boat that's rocking back and forth? Well, in that case, there might be some specificity of training. If that is what you are training for, if that is your functional strength or your real world strength is trying to drop into a squat on a boat, a small boat that's moving a lot, okay, or a raft, I'll agree with you. That might be somewhat useful for that. But what about if someone's on a stable thing like a ground or a floor in a building? Well, there's no carryover. You know what will carry over better? Squatting a heavy barbell with your feet on the hard ground. That would have way, 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 way more carryover. You know what's going to have more carryover to picking up a heavy object? A deadlift. Now people say, what about with awkward loads? Okay, maybe, but what about with a barbell? You show me someone who can, a grown man who can deadlift 500 plus pounds, and 4 people say, oh, that's because you know I deadlift way more than that. Don't throw that at me that that's about me. I've done high reps with 500. I've pulled in the 600 for you guys with just chalk. So no, let's come over to the 500. Show me a grown man who can grab a 500-pound barbell with just chalk and deadlift it with good technique. You don't think that person can bend down and pick up some pretty awkward loads pretty easy? Now, if they built up to doing that with a barbell versus if they just picked up and unloaded, you know, heavy sandbags as an awkward load, which I'm not saying is a bad exercise. It's not. It's definite. That one's definitely not. I actually think that's pretty effective, personally. But for building the most absolute strength, I think that heavy barbell wins. Could a person include some of those, picking up those sandbags and get them up to their shoulder? Yeah, I think that's actually pretty decent exercise, personally. I don't think that's a bad option, especially for like GPP type work, your general physical preparedness. But realistically, what is all this instability, this Bosu ball stuff? What's any of that? None of that's going to carry over to that. But I promise you, the guy who can deadlift 500 pounds versus someone who's only picked up 100-pound awkward bags is still going to be better at walking over and grabbing something really heavy and pulling it off the ground. Who's going to be better at picking up someone who's on the ground if they need to pick them up, a 200-pound man? Man, I'm going to think the guys who built their whole body up and can deadlift 500 plus pounds are going to have an easier time of that. I don't do any instability training, and I have no problem picking up a grown man and throwing him over my shoulder. You know, if I need to pick up one of my buddies in an emergency, I can absolutely do that. Not a problem. Why? Because I strength train. I use big barbell movements, and I isolate everything, right? You know, you guys routinely see me do rep work with 550 on the deadlift. I do rep work 315 on the bench, squat 500 plus, you know. Yeah, guys, that builds functional strength. Not saying some other GPP can't be helpful, but that stuff is where you get your strength potential. That's how you get strong. And that will carry over to all these real world endeavors, including sports. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.